it's all of a sudden, there is no magic money tree, you know. Oh, I see. But there's magic money tree for everything else that the Tories want.
There's no police officer magic tree, there's no nurse magic tree, you know, and this is where they need to...
they lied about everything. They said no tax rises. Lie. 300 million a week for NHS. Lie. Manufacturing will not be, affected. Lie. Food will be cheaper. Absolute lie. No trade barriers. Lie. Every single thing a lie. Pension triple locked. Lie. Every single thing a lie.
The big jump today has been for Penny Mordaunt, who's established herself clearly as the second place candidate.
Poverty rates in London are higher than anywhere else in the country.
We have more people like me, like you talk, and we all come together, but there are no visible changes.
This party certainly wouldn't be getting my vote for so many reasons.
Welcome to The Table, a new discussion show from Byline TV, where we'll be diving into the issues that matter with people we might not always agree with. This isn't just another talk show, though. At The Table, there's no hiding behind sound bites or slogans. We're going straight to the heart of the issues and exploring the philosophical and cultural underpinnings of why we're in the mess we're in. I think we actually can agree we're in a mess. And what a mess it is, with the Bank of England warning of an impending recession, inflation hitting a 40-year high in April and set to reach 15%, while 50% of people have admitted to worrying nearly every day about the increasing cost of living. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, meanwhile, just seem fixated on arguing over culture war issues and making stupid videos than actually helping working people. So after 12 years of Tory government, much of which we spent under austerity before lunging headfirst into Brexit, how much blame can we put at the feet of the Conservative Party? That's the question tonight on The Table. And we'll also be looking at Keir Starmer and the unions and asking, are Labour doing enough to hold the Tories to account? So let's get into it. At the table tonight are Sam Bright, Chief Investigations Editor at Byline Times, Dr Shola Mos-Shogbamimu, lawyer and author of This Is Why I Resist, and Eliot Wilson, columnist at The Telegraph and City AM. So here's something to consider. Experts have said that introducing a 10% tax on wealth over 100 million would raise £69 billion. Now, that would be enough to help with the cost of living and make sure that nobody is unable to heat their home or go hungry. The Tories could do this. So why aren't they? I am going to start with you, if I may. Given that you're coming from City AM, I think you're going to have a view on this. I mean, I just think it's because they're Tories. But
I think the problem with the idea of just taxing very high earners or people with a lot of wealth even higher is that it assumes that the very wealthy will just sit there and surrender that additional money in tax. I mean, you were talking about a 40-year high in inflation. The tax rates at the top end were enormously high in the late 70s, and actually the tax take overall was lower. Because the more you tax people, the more they will look into ways to finesse their tax returns. They will move money around the world. We live in a globalised economy, and people will spend money to save money, as it were. So I think it's not as simple as it appears, which is just saying there are these rich people, let's clobber them with a high tax rate, and then some kind of notional amount that we would get back. So I think it has much greater impact in terms of the kind of economy we are, the kind of people that are coming to this country to invest, and the kind of people who are staying here to spend their wealth and be taxed on it when they're here.
For me, it's morally ambiguous at this stage when you've got 177 billionaires, the highest amount ever, and you're talking about a fairly incremental amount for them versus people going into destitution. I know that you might think that's simplifying things, but what do you think, Sam?
Well, I think the rich people are moving their money across the world as it is, and so taxing them more heavily I don't think is going to increase the frequency with which they do that. And frankly, it's something that we need to try. We need to, I'm not saying that we implement, savage tax hikes on the wealthy, but let's do it strategically, rationally, and incrementally, and see what happens. And let's test and see if the wealth does flee abroad, or if firms don't invest, and in which case we can reevaluate. But for me, the amount of money that it can raise makes a lot of sense in this current crisis.
And I agree with that. I think that the difficulty here for me is around the narrative that, look, the rich aren't going to just sit there and take it, whereas they expect the working class to sit there and take it. The bottom line is, however fast the rich can move their money, they're not going to be able to move it fast enough anyway, to my mind. And I think, to your point, it's not about this being the longest strategy out there. It could be a short-term strategy because of the state of, cost of living crisis right now. Why should the working class have to keep bearing the brunt? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. A lot of these billionaires and millionaires, should we say, have benefited from funding, taxpayers' funding into their organizations, into their corporations. Isn't it time to pay back? Even if for a short while? I don't care if they decide, well, you know what, government, if you do that, I'm going to pack my bags and leave. They're going to come back. And they're not going to pack their bags and leave immediately. Either way, we need to be able to set a fair society. The working class have done this for the longest time. There is no harm in the rich and very wealthy doing their own part.
And I think when you look at how many loopholes there are for tax avoidance and ways for very wealthy people to, they're not paying the same percentage on their wealth as a nurse is. A nurse doesn't have any loopholes to exploit.
Exactly.
I mean, my position is purely a kind of pragmatic one. I mean, the fact is that traditionally and historically, when we've had very high tax rates for the very wealthy, we haven't brought in as much tax as when they've been lower. If we can prove that, this enormous income that we predicate is going to come in, then I'm much more relaxed about it, because I think there is obviously a narrative of social cohesion, and we live in a country in which the gap between the rich and the poor is very large. Social mobility is very slow at the moment in this country compared to other European countries. So I've no issue with that sort of narrative. It's purely about whether that money will in fact come in the way that it's predicated. That I'm not sure about. I'm not a professional economist, so whether that makes me more or less qualified, I'm not sure. But I just think we need to be cautious about the simplistic approach that here is an amount of money that people have, here is what we could tax on them, and here's what we get. I'm not sure it's going to be that simple.
I think the biggest barrier, and the point you've raised is a very fair one, the biggest barrier to the money that we think we may get from taxing the rich, the biggest barrier to that coming through are political influences, are the loopholes. Because if there's a political policy, we're going to tax the rich, but at the same time, behind the scenes, they're giving them more loopholes, it means nothing is actually happening. This is why we need to have the right kind of people in power. And right now, we don't, because we know the Tories, what do? They support their own. And I don't mean this in the sense of just the rich. I'm talking about people who will look to evade the system as much as possible. So I can't believe a word that comes out of their mouths.
And I think we need to be very, very clear what we're looking at. And you only need to listen to people like Martin Lewis, who I think is incredibly, he's apolitical, if you like. He doesn't have a political agenda. And he is speaking truth. We are in one of the richest economies in the world, and we're going to have warm banks. I mean, the fact that we have food banks, to me, is disgusting as it is. More food banks than there are branches of McDonald's we have now. And there was a time they just simply weren't required, because if someone was, being supported by the welfare state, that was enough to get by. And now working people are having to use food banks. That just fundamentally is wrong. So I actually don't care what the uber wealthy want to do or not. Something's out of kilter here. And to me, it's moral, not political.
I think there's a whole set of considerations, though. I was struck recently by reading something that reminded me that people who are in their 30s now in the job market have never had the idea that your pay rises incrementally in the way that some of us will have done.
I know, God forbid. God forbid.
We've been in a difficult economic situation since the great financial crash in 2008. That's not just been a British thing, of course, it's been a worldwide thing. Our economy is in considerable difficulties at the moment, and there are an awful lot of ways we need to address that. And there are short-term fixes and much longer-term processes that need to be put into place to get us into a healthier place. And so I understand entirely the idea that we need to do something now, but we also need to understand that we're not entirely masters of our own destiny in this case we are dealing with.
But I thought, oh no, you can't say that. Because you see, I thought the point of Brexit was to make us masters of our own destiny, to give us control over everything.
Brexit has given us control over the levers of policy that the government can operate, but we're still at the mercy of international trends. That's inevitable. I mean, you know, the great crisis of inflation we've currently got is being caused by trends that are way beyond our control.
Look at my face. Look at my face.
Putin invading Ukraine.
Oh, no, look at that. I was waiting for that to come through. See this face? I'm like, yeah, please take a break. Every single time something goes wrong, it's always some external force. There's no recognition of how Brexit has actually negatively impacted our opportunities or the potential of this country to have done things differently. And that's the point. Okay, once upon a time, oh, we're in a recession. No, it's Russia. Oh, this is happening. It's COVID.
Well, I think what you have to do, you have to compare. Like, we are all at the understand that there's a war in Ukraine going on. And yet, let's look at France. So our energy bills are going up 54%, maybe more than that. France, 4%. Because what did Macron do? He did a little bit of leading. He went to EDF and he nationalised them and capped it. Wow. So that people's bills will be going up by 4% so they can not have to go to a warm bank. You know, these people have power and they should be using it, in my opinion.
But the French are also much more dependent on nuclear energy than we are, for example. So you're very much less at the mercy of problems with gas supply and things like that from Ukraine. So, I mean, it's not really comparing like with like. Whereas if you look at France and Germany and other countries like that, we do have similar inflation rates to them. You know, we're all suffering from inflation. Actually,
but we're suffering worse.
Really bad in the G7 if you look at growth.
But in terms of European countries, we're about mid-table. Some countries are way into double figures and, you know, God knows, places like Ukraine and Turkey, I mean, are almost at 100%. But, you know, we are suffering from very high inflation rates, highest we've had for decades, but so are other countries. And that does make me think that perhaps it's not just something we've done.
I have to say about Brexit that it's not necessarily what Brexit has done to create this crisis, I don't think. I think that Brexit is hamstringing our ability to get out of the crisis. That Brexit was supposed to be this, you know, was supposed to put booster rockets on the economy, or at least provide the opportunity for us to partner with the likes of Brazil, India, China, Russia. No one says that anymore. You know, those sort of countries, you know,
China's great as well there.
Exactly. But that whole ethos...
In America are like, shut up, Good Friday Agreement, sorry.
Exactly, get to the back of the queue, thank you very much. And it hasn't provided booster rockets behind our economy. And I feel now that the queues at the border, the trade friction that has been created by Brexit isn't helping us remotely to get us out of this situation.
No.
What is it that other European countries are doing that we can't?
They're working together. And they, you know, what do you mean?
Free trade.
Exactly. We have trade barriers because of Brexit.
Yeah, but this idea that, you know, somehow Brexit is holding us back from doing specific things to bring down the cost of living or inflation, I'm not quite convinced that this works, because I don't
it's a growth argument rather than... I think it's a recession. I mean, obviously, we've got the two factors of cost of living increasing combined with a recession looming at the end of the year, and I think Brexit speaks to growth more than it does to cost of living. I think, Europe's in the same boat, but growth-wise, we'll probably...
massive labour shortages as well, which is a huge problem for our economy. I would like to mention another fun word, austerity, which, in my personal opinion, is a far greater crime, because Brexit was democratically voted in. I hate it and didn't vote for it, but half the country did. So I can sit with that.
I can't.
Well, I can't, but I can. But austerity, we had no choice. George Osborne decided, OK, you know, we've got all this debt that we need to clear. How are we going to do it? Again, God forbid the wealthy people go, not them, in case they can't bear it. So, no, let's go for, you know, let's get rid of libraries and swimming pools and councils and mental health services and police. Things that make this country great to live in for the whole of society. For me, it was the biggest false economy ever, because they might have chipped away a bit of that deficit, which actually, by the way, no human actually feels. It's just this big mystical number there. And it has really ruined our quality of life on many, many levels. And what happened is, instead of having this cradle and this safety net for when things like COVID hit or a war or everything, you have nothing. You have everything stripped back and barely coping as it is. And now look where we are. And, the rest of Western Europe have sort of still got these safety nets in on social factors like that. And, somebody from the UN was saying, now what we're heading for is some really bad aspects of the states. So you've got millions of people who are lacking healthcare and job losses. And it's so tragic that I think austerity is really negligent.
I think austerity has been normalized in this country, to be honest with you. Even when you listen to the Tory leadership contenders, right? What they're really talking about is austerity without using the word austerity.
Yeah.
They want to say, so Rishi Sunak on one part, they say, we must tighten our belts, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's literally talking about austerity. Liz Truss is like, well, I'm sorry, we can't give handouts to the poor. I know. It's not handouts when it's to the rich. To the rich, it's incentives. But the point is, they're really saying to all of us, you must tighten your belt some more. That's what they're saying.
Yeah, if they said, instead of tax cuts, if they said public service cuts, we'd be like, no, we can't get an ambulance at the moment.
Right.
There isn't anything to cut left. I have a couple of friends, doctor friends, they're just on burnout. It's tragic.
We've had austerity for the last 12 years. Even at the point when we heard, wasn't that just before 2019, when the Tory said, oh, there's no more austerity. I'm happy to announce austerity is at an end.
I don't think Theresa May did. Yeah.
I think she did. Right. Oh, done. And then COVID came, and we had no safety net for that, right? Brexit hit us, no safety net for that.
Well, one of their cuts, one of their fabulous austerity cuts, I think, was PPE. That went well.
Yeah, undoubtedly, we were not prepared for COVID, and we should have been, because those kinds of crises were being war-gamed in Whitehall, and yet when it arrived, there was a sense of panic. And Dominic Cummings, for all that we may loathe him, the narrative he was presenting about what it was like in Whitehall, I found very, very convincing. The idea that people just said, we are screwed, we don't have a plan.
Stuff, I know.
And there should have been, and that was, there's a public inquiry, and that will roll on for years, but I think when it comes out eventually, there will be some very uncomfortable reading for those that were in positions of power in 2019, 2020.
But this is why I get so ticked off when I think of the billions that were wasted on PPE, that were written off, the COVID contracts given to companies that were not capable of delivering.
9 billion wasted on fraud.
Totally.
37 billion to test
How can we
and
claim
trace?
we do not have money, but we have money to waste, and money to write off, and money to say, you know what, we're not going to hold you accountable? That just makes my blood boil. And then what we need money for, they have nothing to give. It's all of a sudden, there is no magic money tree, Oh, I see. But there's magic money tree for everything else that the Tories want.
There's no police officer magic tree. There's no nurse magic tree, and this is where they need to...
They lied about everything. They said no tax rises. Lie. 300 million a week for NHS. Lie. Manufacturing will not be, affected. Lie. Food will be cheaper. Absolute lie. No trade barriers. Lie. Every single thing a lie. Pension triple locked. Lie. Every single thing a lie.
I think, to be fair,
there's no fair. No.
Brexit was pre-COVID, and COVID is something that hit globally. And the fact is that we did find a magic money tree for COVID. We had to. We spent billions and billions of pounds. That was the right thing to do. Not all the decisions were taken wisely. That's a combination of incompetence, graft,
corruption,
and I think just panic as well. I think people threw money at problems hoping that they would solve them, and not everything stuck. But I think there's a more basic philosophical question, and you alluded to it earlier, about deficit and debt, as to whether those are things which we need to concentrate on paying down, because we've been left with a huge debt because of COVID, which was the right thing to do. And Rishi Sunak was there to open the taps when it was appropriate. But do we now try to address those, or do we say, as Liz Truss has kind of been alluding to in a way, we don't need to do it as quickly as we did, or we can pay them down the way that war debts were paid down? I mean, if you look historically at the kind of debt that countries have borne for major conflicts, we paid off our war debt to the Americans about 10 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
The Americans are still paying off the debt for the Civil War. These things can be managed over a much longer time, and that's a conscious decision we could take. But I think, unfortunately, because of the way particularly the Tory leadership is panning out, that's not discussion people are really having. They're having a discussion about gendered bathrooms. They're having a discussion about, what should be in history books. And it's all pretty low level at the moment. And I don't think it's showing anyone to their best advantage.
To tear my hair out, though, I want to put Liz Truss in a time machine back to 2010 so that she can tell David Cameron and George Osborne that at that point the deficit didn't matter and that debt didn't matter. Because that's what we needed to do at that point, was to turn on public spending, invest in the economy. The problem is that Liz Truss is suggesting the opposite now. She's suggesting extending the time in which we pay back debt in order to cut taxes, and particularly to reverse corporation tax cuts that would affect companies that have profits of £250,000 or more a year. So not particularly small companies, profitable companies that we could and should be taxing more heavily.
I know.
Germany, for example, it's got a higher corporation tax burden than we do, and its productivity is comfortably higher than ours. So, what are we doing wrong here?
And they've not left, they've not moved out. I mean, those big-time companies have not moved out of Germany, have they?
Although we do need to be careful about things like corporation tax, because energy companies pay higher corporation tax than others. So if we're saying we need to raise corporation tax to bring in money, but also we're paying too much for our fuel, well, the energy companies are those who will be...
Have we seen how much they earned just recently?
Absolutely. I'm just saying there are two things which need to be related and are often not related in a kind of grab bag of ideas for how we make the country better.
I tell you what, though, we've had 12 years of this lot, giving it a go. It's not looking very good to me. Nothing works. Nothing is... I can't really think of anything that's really improved. And I'm talking pre-COVID, transport, infrastructure, the quality of life for ordinary people. And looking at my kids, where is the climate strategy? How are they? They're going to be living with me till they're 65. I quite like them, that's all right. But there'll be a point I'll be like, can you just naff off? And, they'll never be able to afford a flat. It's so fundamentally unfair. I think you said something about, I think we're maybe a similar age, I don't know. When we were growing up, there was this idea, quite old-fashioned now, that you work and then you might get a job and then one day you might get a pay rise and then you might get another promotion and get a pay rise. At a certain point, you sort of bought a flat. Yeah. It wasn't this outlandish idea of going to look, and again, someone I know, a psychiatrist in the NHS, wow, he's studied, he's one of the cleverest people I know. He's sort of looking at these places that you wouldn't put a student that you didn't like in these things. Right. And it breaks my heart. That's not a society that I enjoy living in.
There's a huge problem with the housing stock in this country, and that's partly because, it was very interesting to see what some of the candidates for the Premiership were saying. They were saying, we want to give more control to local people over where houses are built. Well, actually, that's one thing where that's the absolute worst thing to do, because if you say to people, do you want us to build loads more houses in your backyard, they're going to say no, build them somewhere else. Somewhere else is always someone else.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is an instance where you do need national government saying, well, no, look, we clearly have a shortage of housing. We have a shortage of affordable housing, even more so than just housing in general. And yet we're going to give the power to these, nice rural or suburban communities to decide whether they want it there or not. Well, that's not going to help. And so that's going to make the house prices go up and up and up. And, people will invest in housing, particularly in London, on the grounds that they know they're never going to lose money on it. House prices will not fall. And that's a calculation anyone can make. And it's a calculation that those who are fortunate enough to be able to invest in property.
Or just old, like me. I'm old. I'm not old, I'm 48, but I bought a flat when I was really young, and I really didn't put much money down. I saved and saved. I put £5,000 down. And that's a lot of money, but my granddad died and gave me a couple of grand, which I inherited, and then I got a full-time job as a PA, and I saved, and I got a flat. That's just luck. It's not like, and this is what I hate about capitalism. Yeah, it's because it's then people like me are like, I just invested really wisely, actually, and now, and it's like, no, I didn't, because my psychiatrist friend would need 40,000 or 50,000 to get a nastier flat. So, but he's not earning anything more particularly than he would have earned then.
But this is why the real question ends up being, where is the opposition? Because
I'm glad you brought me onto that.
In all the things that we're discussing, right? There's an element I can hear from all of us of frustration, almost like, we know it's been the last 12 years, nothing has changed. What's going to change? None of us here are politicians. We do our own bits in reporting and commenting.
Yeah, they have changed.
He's screaming all of that, right. But the point is, where is the real political opposition who are elected to bring about change, to challenge, to do all of that? And I'm telling you right now, I'm still looking. I've got 4 eyes on.
I tell you where he is. Mick Lynch.
Oh, yeah.
What do you both think? And I really mean, what a voice, cutting through in a way that Starmer isn't. What do you think?
Yeah, genuinely, I think he's been fantastic. He's bulldozed through the national media with a lot of passion recently. I think the Labour Party seems to be sceptical. It seems hesitant, a bit conservative in its attitude. It doesn't want to go there. It doesn't want to call out the fundamentals of life that are wrong.
Right.
Basically.
Why?
Because it thinks that it needs to be a trusted pair of hands. And there has been a big trust problem with the Labour Party in recent years. That is fair enough. I can see their hesitancy. The fact, though, is that you look at politics across the world in recent years, and left-wing economic populism is actually pretty popular. You look at all the policies, left-wing policies to do with ownership of public services, in terms of helping the poor with the cost of living crisis, poverty, etc., they're universally popular. You look at Bernie Sanders, his economic ideas in the United States are actually very popular. Donald Trump adopted a relative degree of left-wing economic populism in terms of investing in infrastructure. All of this is very popular, and Mick Lynch is just tapping into that vein of public thought that hasn't been given an outlet in recent years. And maybe it will come out in the Labour Party in the next couple of years. They have time, but I think Starmer is innately a conservative.
Yeah, I think so.
Man.
And that's the problem here. I think Starmer is trying to play, I don't know if it's the long game or what. He wants to go, wait, hold up a second. We have to win back this red wall seat. We don't want to do the Jeremy Corbyn style of calling out every single, social issue as Jeremy did. But that was popular too, because people needed to hear that it was being called out. I think that most part, I find Starmer, look, he's not a bad guy, but there are times I swear to God, can you just say what needs to be said? I understand you want to achieve balance, but this balance is coming across as though you either don't care or you're not being strategic. And this whole thing with Mick Lynch and the strikes, the entire nonsense that Labour MPs cannot join the picket line, to me, that's just nonsense.
Was a known goal. Labour are Labour. There's a clue in the name.
I think talking politically as well, conviction politicians do well in the modern era. You look at someone like Farage compared to other politicians who are on the radical right, who are not popular whatsoever. Farage knows what he stands for and can argue it actually. You can argue
even if it doesn't make sense.
He galvanised people.
He's a good communicator. Yeah. He's a very good communicator. Trump's the same. Sanders is the same. Andy Burnham is the same to some degree in Greater Manchester. You have to seem as though you believe what you're trying to sell, or else people just they're not going to buy it.
I think there was a problem that the Labour Party has, and which the Democrats in America had in 2020 as well, which was, the Labour Party thought, right, we've got to get somebody better than Corbyn. And, the Democrats thought, well, we've got to beat Trump. And both of those, that's all they achieved. I mean, they did it with almost the least good candidate, but somebody who was just good enough to achieve that basic aim. So, the Democrats looked at all the candidates who were running to be the presidential nominee, and they picked a guy who was pushing 80 and who had never been, a particularly sharp political operator when he was young, and they put him up against Donald Trump, and he did win, but that's about all. And we're now seeing the fairly catastrophic consequences of that. Equally, when the Labour Party decided... His age is not the
issue, though. His age is...
I think it's an issue.
No. I take your point that maybe compared to some other contenders, he wasn't the, the snazziest, maybe like the Pete Buttigieg. Now, he comes across as very, very convicted. But I take your point that with Biden came across as a safe pair of hands, without looking like they are far, right-wing, like the Trump people, and they're too left-wing, like, our good friend, what's his name again? He just go, Sanders, Bernie Sanders. Do you see what I mean? So I take your point on that, but his age is not an issue
It's
for me.
really interesting that obviously all political parties poll everything, and you don't have to go very far to hear people saying, I don't know what Starmer's about and he's not cutting through. So do something about it, because I've been sort of thinking, I just really want a change of government desperately. I really particularly don't like this. I see them as a cabal and just really damaging my country. But with Starmer, I'm like, come on, you can do it. Okay, come on, here we go. No, okay. Oh, very, very cautious. Oh, no, never rejoin the single market. Okay, that's quite absolute. Okay, because that would be quite good. This is the other issue I have. Brexit, fine. That was what everybody wanted. Well, not everybody was voted in. But where's the pragmatism? Because then COVID has hit, okay, and there has been a war. So to now, for these two candidates to be sort of still chasing the very, very hardest version of that, when all the main proponents of Brexit were saying we'd stay in the single market, to me, I'm like, you know, things have changed a bit. So should we just maybe try and preserve our economy a tiny bit and do things that maybe help it?
No, we can't. Don't you understand?
Why?
Because we have to keep Brexit safe.
Yeah,
And it's not.
That's one of the weirdest things that's come
I know,
out of
it's
this.
the ideology of
I don't even understand
Brexit.
what the
Yeah, what
phrase means.
No.
Brexit safe. It's like it's this sort of holy relic which needs to be preserved. And yet, but I mean, I understand why they're doing it, because both of the candidates have difficulties with Brexit. I mean, Sunak was a leaver, and yet he's seen as somehow more centrist, and Truss was a Remainer, and yet she's seen as the kind of bearer of the Johnsonite flame, if such a thing exists. But what they're doing is essentially touching a part of the Conservative electorate, if you like, which needs to be massaged and saying, look, we are still on course. We're not backsliding. There's no sense of this giving into Ramonerism, and that's all very targeted language, because
The real headbangers.
well,
because
they're currently running for election among an electorate of less than 200,000 people.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to remember.
Yeah.
What that happens after September the 5th is a different ballgame. But I think, they are... people are talking about things in a very sort of abstracted and extremist way in terms of keeping Brexit safe and, all of that kind of thing. But it just strikes me that...
keeping it safe because it's so great.
I
It's really good. Those cues keep that safe. And I tell you what, when I went on holiday, I got really stung with my phone bill. It was brilliant. Keep that safe. Keep it safe. I love paying data roaming.
The issue with Starmer that you were talking about, I think, is a very real one for the Labour Party, because he does seem to be innately very cautious. And I think the strikes recently and the popularity of Mick Lynch have brought this to a head. I mean, I'm not a Labour voter, but I wrote a piece in City M a few weeks ago which said, look, if you were Keir Starmer, here's what I would have said. And I would have positioned him as... the leader of the Labour Party, which was born out of the union movement, and I would have gone on television and said, look, I didn't become leader of the Labour Party to see workers having their rights removed and their pay reduced.
Right.
That would have been the thing to say.
Simple.
You've got to carry people, even if they don't. But even if people aren't naturally receptive to that argument, you've got to carry them. That's what politics is about. It's about convincing people of your argument. And Starmer looks at them and then travels to where they're at, rather than trying to take them on a journey.
It's almost as though they forget that Brexiters are also real workers.
Yeah.
Anti-workers are also real workers. I mean, the people who are experiencing this are people from all different backgrounds of the society. They deserve to have that pay rise. They deserve to be able to keep their workers' rights, all of that. And I'll say this, right? Let me just say this. I know that there are 200,000 plus Tory party members, right? And, I am sure not all of them fit this bill, right? Because I had to say to myself, of course not all of them fit this bill. But I'm sorry, how simple do you have to be to not understand and to not see, and this is not you, I'm just talking, I don't know why I'm looking at you, but let me look at all of you, right? To not see the impact on the fishing industry, the farming industry, the manufacturing industry, the cost of living crisis, and all of these other problems. But yet you need to be, to use your word, massaged with falsehoods, with anti-workery nonsense. I mean, what the hell? I don't get that.
It's exhausting. And Mick Lynch, I'll just keep going on about him, but it's so refreshing. And when he was talking about values and then your policy come, which I think reflects exactly what you're saying. People they understand when someone is authentic, okay? And actually, as much as he was not my bag, Boris Johnson, managed to get a huge swathe of the electorate to vote for him because they were like, OK, I get what he's about. I know. But in a way that Truss and Sunak don't, and in a way that Starmer doesn't, and in a way that Mick Lynch does. And for me, talking about Starmer, and he was saying, I want the Labour project to, I want it to do well, but he needs to get his values sorted out. And he does.
I agree. But I think, and I will still say this forevermore, that the reason why Boris Johnson got voted in was because of Brexit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Because I think that if there was no Brexit and it was just Boris Johnson versus Jeremy Corbyn, there would still be people who vote for Boris Johnson, but every single person that voted for Boris Johnson knew this man lacked substance, knew he lacked good judgment, knew he was a clown. They knew all that.
We go on other shows where sometimes people ring in and they are literally upset. Like he's a little boy that's been, he's so unfair. He was, he did his best and he's been really stabbed in the back. And you're like, really? And then he's caretaker PM and he's just sort of like lumping about at his wedding and not doing anything.
That's what I don't get. I mean, I get this attack a lot. Oh, you're just a Boris basher. I'm like, look, I'm sorry. If I see something is outrageously wrong, isn't that what we should all be doing? I know you have also spoken out against the incompetence of the government.
I mean, I was not a Boris supporter, but I think there is an extraordinary political phenomenon that we still haven't worked out that encompass both Boris and Trump, which is that they, despite their backgrounds, made the ordinary voter think that they had their best interests at heart.
Can you imagine?
And, our ambassador in Washington at the time, Kim Darroch, when he took over just before Trump was elected, he went on a tour of America and talked to, taxi drivers and people in shops and things. And they said they didn't like Hillary, but they were going to vote for Donald Trump because he understood them. Now, that makes no sense on the surface, but it happened. And it's happened with Boris as well. You have people in sort of northeastern constituencies where I grew up saying that, Boris, he may be, he's not perfect, but he's just like us. You think he's not like you at all. He's not like any of us.
Because that's your neck of the woods, though. Do you think a big part of the manifesto was like levelling up? Do you think the same people now are like, that hasn't happened and have lost faith? Or what's your opinion? Because I don't know.
I think a lot of what happened with both the support for Brexit and then the support for Boris was that there were policy issues, but most of all, I think people felt disenfranchised. They felt that politics was no longer about them, no longer included them. Whereas because Boris Johnson has this, to be kind to him, iconoclastic approach to political institutions, he seemed to be reaching beyond the political classes and saying to the electorate, I'm with you, we don't need to worry about all of these sort of half-truths and difficult concepts, just come along with me, I'll speak plainly,
because
my hair will be out of joint, I'll say whoops every so often, but it'll all be fine.
But that's the thing, look, Trump and Boris Johnson are from the exact same, fabric of society. The only difference I see between both of them is that Boris Johnson has better hair. I mean, it looks real, actually, compared to Trump's, right?
Do you know what? Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that I think that Boris Johnson was sent down from the Red Wall as sort of a human wrecking ball to sort of, to try and demolish the established order. And when that came back to roost, with the whole Partygate stuff, and they saw that actually he's only in it for himself and will destroy everything for his own benefit, then they realised that he wasn't as anti-establishment as they thought. And I think this is the great problem. We talked about social cohesion at the start, and I think this economic crisis is actually a more general political crisis in that the fundamentals of life aren't stacking up right now for the majority of people. And we're saying they don't have an outlet. Liz Truss wants to cut taxes, not invest in public services. Keir Starmer's wooden. He can, he can't convince anybody of his own arguments. And so where is the outlet? And there is an opportunity, I think, for the extremes of the political spectrum to gain support now, because people they've had their moment of trying to have this guy trash the Westminster system, bring about Brexit, and it didn't work. And so they're going to reach for things that are even more dangerous than him.
But have you noticed that we have not once mentioned the Liberal Democrats? Even though they are winning seats.
Yeah, they're doing well. You never know. It might be a coalition.
I don't even know what they're winning on. That's the thing. Their policies or
just
whatever.
Not being either of the other two.
It's not coming out.
That's always win on, which is not being the other people.
Yeah, exactly. So, just very quickly, because we're kind of out of time, would Truss or Sunak get your vote?
Oh, God. Spoiled ballot. But Sunak, obviously. Yeah.
I genuinely don't know. I've got a ballot paper. It's sitting at home reproaching me, and I genuinely don't know what to do with it.
Okie dokie.
God forbid.
I'm not going to ask you. And I've got this horrible image that we're going to finish on, which is Boris Johnson, like in the Miley Cyrus video now, doing the wrecking ball, because you said about that, and now I've got this image And so we're going to end it there because that is all that we've got time for tonight. I think that's been a really productive discussion, but what did you think? Did anybody change your mind? Please let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more juicy discussions like this from Byline TV. And you can get involved too by becoming a member at byline.tv/join. And then if you sign up, you'll be supporting Byline TV and you'll get access to loads of perks too, like deciding what topics you would like to see on the table and telling us what questions you'd like to see the panel answer. There are also hours and hours of exclusives and extended content, live Q&As, and the chance to talk directly to the producers of Byline TV. They're very nice. So just go to byline.tv/join to become a member today. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you again next week at the table.